Hi there. It's Eli with the Summit Lighthouse Order of St. Joseph, which is a holy order of the Summit Lighthouse and Church Universal and Triumphant. And I have a series of videos that are posted for people who might just be joining this now. It's July 28th, 2013 at 6:20 p.m. Part of my mission is twofold. First, to collect information and to sort of bring you along with me as I study. And that's a form of meditation. And so I maintain sort of a meditative state while I'm doing that, and periodically also relay information from the masters if I receive such information. So I'm here to take phone calls and interacting with people over the internet. I just wanted to be clear what I think that should happen, because this is not necessarily organized in a typical fashion. If you watch Elizabeth Clare Prophet on the internet, I mean, obviously she's giving these incredible sermons, and she's stumping and so forth. And clearly she's presenting information in an organized fashion. What I'm trying to do is compile research that will be relevant to two separate books that I'm writing. One on the New Aquarian dispensation, based upon the traditional teachings, the traditional New Age / New Thought teachings, ancient wisdom teachings, and also the teachings as they relate directly to Church Universal and Triumphant, as established by Mark and Elizabeth Clare Prophet, with Mark and Elizabeth Clare Prophet serving as the messengers within that church. So I'm seeing if there are any questions coming through. The position of the church with respect to the military, I don't know. I was listening to someone describe the Church Universal and Triumphant as having sort of recently undergone a transformation with two groups, conservative and more progressive. I don't think that Mother supported war, but to the best, and other people might have a different opinion about that, but I've read this and I believe this, that they don't believe in pacifism. I don't think that Church Universal and Triumphant believes in just sort of allowing danger or allowing people to violate our freedoms and that sort of thing. I wouldn't imagine. I personally don't support certain kinds of military intervention. I would never support a military intervention that was conducted by anything other than an all-volunteer army. And truthfully, I don't think that any sort of physical violence is never necessary. It might be under certain circumstances that certain systems ought to be occupied. I mean, I believe that that's the case. But I mean, as far as cybernetic wars or electronic wars and that sort of thing, we're all contributors in some respect, and there are angelic forces working around us all the time, we summon angels. And we summon angels to do our bidding against evil. So that's a form of war. So we are continuously, to some extent, engaged in a war against evil, and I think it's fair to make that claim. But as far as military action is concerned, I don't think that people, and I talk about this a lot because I think it's important, because it made a significant trace in the historical record, or it left a trace in the historical record, that Mother had nuclear fallout shelters built and so forth back in the 80s, and people still watch that and remember that from Oprah and that sort of thing. And she described it as common sense preparedness. But that doesn't mean that they're militant, and they had been militant in that respect. And then the gun running, I don't know. I know that there are arrests for gun stockpiling, but there's some, there are two entirely different sets of information within the church about exactly what was going on during that period. So I really can't answer that. But I mean, I don't think that you know, I don't think war is ever supported by people who are following the true dispensation. I don't think it's ever necessary. I think that the things that we can achieve can occur in a fashion that doesn't involve physical violence. That doesn't mean that the fallen angels are going to be happy with the outcome. But I mean, I think that if we're utilizing the energetic and cosmic resources at our disposal to the fullest of their capacity, then we're going to be able to achieve the objectives that we need to achieve, relative to the evil doers and their agenda. And that's a form of war. So in that respect, I mean, there is a cosmological war underway. But supporting the military. I can't imagine that if Elizabeth Clare Prophet had all the information about the true nature of the draft and all of the selective service nonsense and foolishness that went on, that she would have supported that. The church, traditionally in the 70s and 80s and again in the 90s, up until the church's transition, was commenting, had their own political agenda and stated it in a good degree of detail. And if you watch Elizabeth Clare Prophet again, and I've mentioned this in another video recordings, that she spoke out against communism, specifically against communism, in a series of lectures. Later would say, and that kind of can be surprising to some people who sort of associate the New Age movement with a sort of left-wing ideology, not to mention the number of I would say left-leaning or quote-unquote progressive people that might have moved there during the 70s and 80s to Montana to pursue that sort of a life. It seems to be that you have to hand it to Elizabeth Clare Prophet for stating her beliefs and insisting upon her beliefs, her anti-communist agenda. However, over the years, and you'd expect maybe a little bit of a different story coming from a quote-unquote New Age prophet, but over the years, she did update her opinion to say, and the church did release information that said it's also inappropriate for an unbalanced capitalist agenda to take hold as well. So, I mean, the corporations shouldn't be in charge shutting down God or shutting down the teaching or, advancing this agenda against our children and that sort of thing. But you can read the Pearls and the Masters, and I would imagine El Morya in particular would have more specific information about all of that. But I don't think that she ever was gung-ho about people joining up to go off and die, and I don't think that she would have subjected her own sons or other people's male children to that sort of treatment. As far as the draft is concerned, or the military, I'm not sure what you mean by the military intervention. If you talk about, if you're speaking about acting in an organized fashion to put a stop to certain kinds of behavior, then I would imagine that that's supported, because they don't propose a strictly pacifist agenda. To the best of my knowledge, for instance, the Quakers believe that we should detach from that. They believe in nonviolence under all circumstances, and the Church Universal and Triumphant believes that we shouldn't sit back if people are threatening us. But to the extent that how that would play out in today's world or under these circumstances, I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you that. Mother Mary, I don't have that information. I know that there's a teaching that's forthcoming from Beloved Mary, Mother Mary. More information about Christology, specifically as it relates to different views of the hypostasis. And I want to add here hypostatic union. The nature of Jesus, whether Jesus was of one divine nature or two, that's a debate within the Catholic Church, also within the Reformed churches, and it does differ from how Church Universal and Triumphant refers to Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness, really, that concept the concept of Christ as the higher mind, or the higher self, isn't really present in Catholicism in the way that it's present at Summit Lighthouse. But Beloved Mary has disclosed that there's, a need for additional information. There's also a need in that I'm not sure which master necessarily is putting this forward at this juncture, but the information I'm receiving is that more information needs to be disclosed with respect to the difference between karma and sin. And I think that Elizabeth Clare Prophet, in my view, was the bearer of the true dispensation, and she was a true messenger of God. And as Aaron said, at least, and I'm not sure how Aaron describes her mother's position within the church these days, necessarily in detail. I have some idea, but back in the 80s, they believed that she was kind of like a biblical prophet, and I believe that about Elizabeth Clare Prophet. However, I think on occasion, and as I've said in previous recordings, if you look at one of my recordings, and I think I refer to it as, the recording that's sort of addressing whether or not Elizabeth Clare Prophet was Jezebel from the Bible, if she's depicted in the Bible as Jezebel. This is what one religious leader, I think, possibly from England, I'm not really sure exactly where she has set up shop, but has said in a disdainful fashion, not pleased for whatever reason with Church Universal and Triumphant. And actually, you can probably look that up on the internet as well. In any event, my point was about the Bible. I'm not quite clear. Oh, karma and sin. So with karma and sin, I believe that Elizabeth Clare Prophet was a prophet, a biblical prophet. I don't think that, I think at times she too spoke in parables. If you look at the Bible isn't pure. It's not pure in the literal sense. In other words, there are things that are written in the Bible that other people could have put in there. When you read about hating groups of people in the Bible, you can pretty much be guaranteed that it's inaccurate information. And a lot of what atheists tend to do, and agnostics, and I think there's a place for agnostic dialogue or skeptical dialogue within the church. But I mean, I'm not an atheist or an agnostic. However, I think that a lot of times the Bible is appropriated by people who don't want to believe in God, or who don't believe in God, or who don't support religion. And they say, but see what the Bible says, how racist and sexist and homophobic and so forth the Bible is. Do you see that? That means that there's no God, or that means that, or I don't want to believe in that God, so I don't believe in God. Or the impression that is imparted by people who say that is that we shouldn't believe in God because the Bible is flawed. Well, the Bible was manipulated by the church fathers, the people involved in the Nicene Council. People added things to the Bible. People took things out of the Bible. It's undergone a lot of renditions or not renditions. There've been a lot of variant interpretations within the Bible. Not to mention that sometimes people aren't translating things right. The Bible is being translated from different languages, and the English scholars who are translating it don't necessarily have a grasp on the original, the original language. So it's important to bear that in mind as well as when we're reading all these things. So there's Beloved Mary, who wants to speak more about Christology. There's also there's impetus in the direction of discussing karma and sin. Mother has said, and again, and I'm getting back to my point about Mother having made statements that, on the surface, if you don't put them into context, can be difficult to take. And I don't necessarily believe that, but I don't believe that when she made certain statements that she was operating under the assumption that the people at CUT, I don't believe that she thought that they would take it the wrong way. think that there was sort of a codified approach to distributing information at CUT under certain circumstances. So, I don't, for instance, one of the things that I don't believe that she has said before, she says things, again, to represent other things that are going on. In other words, she wants to transmit a message to someone in a position of peril, for instance, some of her parishioners. And if they sort of know that there's a tendency towards fundamentalist language under certain circumstances to which they don't necessarily adhere, but they all know the score from having heard the same sets of information being passed down through traditional Christianity. And there's still a recognition there, so some of that language is going to be utilized to transmit coded information that has been, abbreviated or compacted somehow so that, everybody is on the same page. Under certain circumstances, people also have to employ their own sort of sense of judgment, and people mishear things. I mean, people hear things come through the ether that are the voices of exterior parts of exterior consciousness or exterior entities. And if those voices are coming through, you can either choose to cancel them out or not cancel them out. And under certain circumstances, if we're engaging in guru yoga the right way, that is the preservation of the guru's image so that you're able to key in on the message more clearly. If we're voting out any sort of negativity that we're interpreting or that she's delivering, then we have a clearer understanding of the true teaching in the big picture. She never said she was perfect, and she made mistakes. So karma and sin, I don't believe, and I think that the masters want to update this. I'm not saying that Elizabeth Clare Prophet wasn't a messenger, but I'm saying that some of the teachings on karma and sin, it needs additional language. The language needs to be, it needs to be clarified, and it needs to be clarified by way of, perhaps more of a discussion. But I don't think that, our physical maladies are necessarily, I believe in reincarnation, not necessarily in the way that we're typically taught to understand it, but I don't think that people who come into this life are paying a debt for decisions that they consciously made that were wrong in a previous life if they're having a hard time in this life. In other words, someone who has just a terrible life but is a decent person in reality, here and now, and this is part of the master teaching that's emerging now, is not necessarily, and a clarification of Mrs. Prophet's teachings. It's not that we did something to deserve the hard time that we're having now. It's that we didn't balance karma, or it's that we misused energy. Misusing energy is not the same as sinning. And because we use a lot of traditional Christian structures, we tend to associate our quote-unquote bad karma with having sinned or done something wrong, transgressed against someone within the community, consciously done something wrong against somebody. And truly, and again, that's why fallen angels, it's so important to stay away from bad people and to steer clear of bad people, and not to have people who have a fallen angel in them or over them affecting your reality. Why? Because they're going to distribute the bad karma to you. You're going to have to bear the bad karma of being around that individual fallen angel. That's not a sin. You're not suffering because of something that you've done against God or done a transgression against someone in your community. You're suffering because of the presence of the fallen angels. And the masters really want to get that information out. And that's part of the clarification, I suppose. I'm not really sure what to call it, but I mean, it's additional information based upon the original teachings. And I mean, that's part of what Mother wants, is she wants the true word and the true message. And I don't think that she has ever come forward and said, no, everything that I say is to be taken, at face value, and it's never to be altered, and nobody can contribute to the conversation. Nobody else ever receives information. I don't believe that that's the case. I do believe that she was the messenger of God, And I think that her teaching should be preserved and enhanced by the continuation and development of the revelation with respect to the teaching. But karma and sin, but sometimes you'll read, and again, it's the shorthand. And a lot of people show up too, and they're expecting, and there are a lot of, as Catholics in the church, former Catholics, people, and I think there's a fundamentalist element to it, and there have been changes in the last 10 or 20 years, but sometimes hellfire and brimstone is what you want to hear. You don't want to sign up to have someone pointing the finger at you and saying you're a bad person, but you want to hear something somewhat on the ferocious side, or not, if not ferocious, then you want to hear someone speaking with clear authority. And a lot of times what we're identifying as being authority has that sort of biblical old guard ring to it, or scripture-based old guard ring to it. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't bring in Gnosticism. And I mean, we should be looking at the alternative texts and understanding the true teachings and developing contemporary manners of relaying the teaching and distributing information and studying the masters. And it should be progressive to the point to the extent that being progressive is appropriate. But some of the teachings, if you go into the recordings and so forth, do have kind of a Bible beating ring to them. Personally, I'm not offended by that if it's coming from Mother. It's because as a Chela, I am preserving the image. I'm not letting myself absorb what I know to be negative or part of maybe a human shortcoming. I am taking that out of my recollection, out of my interaction with the teaching as it's coming through her. And that's different. And I had to learn that. And I learned that when I entered the church. That's how you follow a guru. You don't look at a guru like you do your family or your friends, where you have expectations and you are prepared to allow them to fail. And under certain circumstances, if you're angry or if you need additional help and you're not getting it, or people aren't paying attention to you or addressing needs that ought to be addressed, we have the habit of pointing the finger at that guy and saying, go, have Carl from down the street or my cousin Paul or my brother or whomever do X, Y, and Z for me because I need help and I'm not getting it. So I'm going to make them out to be the bad guy. Well, that sometimes you kind of have to point the finger at someone else and be like, you're not helping person X, Y, and Z. Or what you said yesterday, indicates that you need to get on board with helping these people. So yeah, you ought to look bad, or yes, you're lying, or whatever the situation might be. With a guru, you want to be able to return. That should be your precious moment that is personal to you. You don't want the guru to fail you, and you don't want the guru to instruct you in a manner that is not compliant with the will of God. And yes, that person is human, but you don't treat their image as you do the other people around you. And people say, well, that's cult worship or that's cult behavior or idol worship. It's not. It's an old religious practice. It's understood that person is there to be the messenger of God. That person isn't there to share the breakfast table with you. She's not there to have a beer down at the bar. That might happen. I'm not saying that's never going to happen in a million years. But I mean, her point, her mission, and her I'm use a French phrase here, raison d'être, is not to be everybody's buddy. It's to be the messenger, and she's precious and valued because we preserve the image of her so that we have a clearer connection to the teaching. It assists, energetically assists her in delivering the information. We don't carry resentment because we ensure that we don't let that enter the field, the thought matrix, when we're interacting with the material. And that's important. It was a huge step for me to take. It's a leap of faith. And if you don't make it, you don't make it. But then you'll never have that experience. You're never going to understand if you just sort of include her as a person who is frail and fails and makes mistakes, and when you are done with it, you just sort of throw her to the wolves and let people have their way with their opinions of her and so forth. What are you left with when you need someone to turn to? And that's why Mother is there. I mean, she's there to be that pipeline to salvation, not in the sense of we're all being damned by God, but certainly in the sense that we're all fighting a war against fallen angels, right? I mean, that's really the way to look at this. Not that it's God's fault, which is what we're taught in the Orthodox churches that are infested by, the influence of fallen angels, incidentally. It's not God who's out to manipulate us and do harm. It's fallen angels. It's bad people. It's people who have accepted the influence of Satan, and who just feel that it's a-okay to enslave and degrade humanity and so forth. And we've spent the last since the Enlightenment or whatever, trying to chalk up everything, trying to take religion out of the equation so that it's not about people's choices anymore, trying to find locate biological reasons that people are treating us badly, or psychological reasons. Psychology does play into it, but the medical components of psychology sure don't. I mean, someone is not being a bad, evil, rotten to the core person who's tearing apart families and subjecting children to harassment in schools and all of this stuff because there's something wrong with them biologically, and they don't suffer from a moral problem, or whatever, quote unquote moral problem, or whatever else it is that they're going to say in some of these psychiatry manuals that are so dangerous, by the way. They're bad people. They've made bad choices, and we as a society, we don't want to have to deal with them because we're too lazy. We're too lazy to say person X, Y, and Z, you're out of here. When we move, when we go and do our own thing, you're not coming, because we don't want that around us. So I think the church is criticized in part for that. And it's just time to cut certain people off. U.S. terrorists operating within the government. And I'm not talking about Islamic people. We're blaming the Islamic people for all the trouble in the world, when it's people who are natively American who are destroying the country all on their own and lying about it and using the media to lie about it. It's time that certain, we want to talk about information, coded information. Mother coming forward and saying, hellfire and brimstone in a very, articulate fashion, by the way, and in a very interesting manner. But the people in the church understanding the Guru Chela relationship, understanding where that's coming from, accepting the components of it that are acceptable. And sometimes we want to be encouraged in a certain direction and want to know that God's really angry, and that's okay. And some people respond to that positively. And need it, need the motivation, the inspiration. But it's you do have to preserve the image of the Guru if you want to keep returning to the teaching. And when I decided that I was going to make that commitment to Mother, it opened up my world to all sorts of different streams of information, different manners of interpreting the teachings. Different prophets now an embodiment would come through, and I was able to interact with them. You would tire of the teaching by way of one Guru if you allowed other people to taint the image of the Guru. So that, again, and then there are other words for it, and I can there's a Hindu, and I can bring that into this as well in a bit. There's a Hindu word for that as well. When you look at an icon, you want to preserve the purity of the icon and the integrity of the icon. So you go through a form of, and we need sort of a lexicon, I think, for this as well. But there's a mental process that you go through and a spiritual process that you go through when you're visualizing something and actually looking at something that's being recorded in your mind. You want to make sure that there's reverence and awe, and that you're preserving that image. You're treating that image differently from what you do when you see day-to-day images, because it helps solidify mental picturing in the thought forms. When we all work with thought forms, it's really important to have the right sort of information in your brain. So that's the second part of that. So sin and karma. Getting back to that a little bit. So sin, typically speaking, in the Christian churches and the Reformed churches and the Catholic Church, is willfully doing wrong, generally speaking, and deciding that you're going to steal Uncle Tom's wallet or go out and do whatever, X, Y, and Z. And of course we can have the argument, well, certain sins are victimless sins and maybe shouldn't be considered sins at all. I don't know, sins having to do with sexuality or whether or not you drink, that sort of thing. And there are purists within the church, within Church Universal Triumphant, who eschew alcohol and cigarettes, and that they want to keep all of that out, and still are very rigid about their lifestyle, how they're conducting their business publicly and all. And then there are other people who really don't care and still feel like they're hooked in, keyed in on what's going on with Mark and Guru Ma. So sin and karma. So sin is consciously doing wrong, and I would argue consciously doing wrong against somebody else. Karma, though, is different. Is the information that I'm getting, and I think if you look at the translations of what karma means, you'll find that, to the best of my knowledge, you'll find that it's bad yogic practice. It's karma. When you generate bad karma, you're doing something wrong that doesn't have a moral weight to it. So if I say right now, I'm going to just cut you off, not do this anymore, even though I've committed to it, and even though it's in the live stream right now, I'm just going to shut down because I have the right to, and you don't have the expectation. I'm not beholden to you for anything, and I'm not relaying life-saving information to you, or it's just something that I want to do, and maybe you're bored, etc. But if I just shut this down right now and left, I would have an energetic loss, and that energetic, that because I've committed to doing this, and that energetic dispersal or degradation would affect me and would generate quote-unquote bad karma, and I would have to make up for it. I'd have to do something. I'd have to engage in yoga, cook a macrobiotic meal, something to that effect to draw the energy back in where it's supposed to be. That's bad karma, and I haven't sinned in the biblical sense. But sin and karma, we're still in the habit of using it interchangeably, and I think it's confusing enough to people, especially people who are new to the church, to require additional teaching and writing, because karma is really akin to the result of bad energetic practice, bad karma. When we're holding the balance for ourselves or we're holding the balance for other people, we're attempting to rein in. We're attempting to flow energy in the right way, which is laudable. But I mean, breaking out of that isn't a sin in the sense that we were taught as Catholics. We're not choosing to err against other people. We're not depriving one of our brothers or sisters of something valuable for our own benefit. It's that we're failing energetically. And again, the influence of evil people. And you want to say, that's diabolical forces. Well, we're human beings, and so when we pray, we call down. So we're going to fail when the devil tries to reach his hand in, or when fallen angels are throwing their radiation and negative powers at us and trying to keep us out of the field of success. So sin and karma is important. Christology, and there'll be more about this, and this will be part of the writing as well. Christology, and Kuthumi. There's a lot of new information coming forward about animals. The ensoulment of our shared sort of identity from a soul perspective with companion animals is also important. And I'll try to talk about more about that down the line as well. Something about an invocation. Nag Hammadi. Let's see, what are you looking at? Wants to know about complete listing of master retreats. I know that Mother added retreats over the course of her tenure as messenger. I'm assuming that there were traditional retreats that were handed down through typical Saint Germain IM activity. That's kind of interesting, actually, to see sort of how all of that panned out. But that Mother, when Mother started Church Universal and Triumphant, she added, I think it was about 200 additional retreat locations. So, a lot of those are going to be locations that were revealed to her by the masters. So. I can't see what you're typing because it's all coming across as symbols. It's like, it looks like a certain kind of font, like, what is it called, dingbat font or zigzag font, something to that effect. I was instructed to do a reading from the Bible, passages from the Bible, and I'm not sure where. I think from John, probably, at some point, with you. Maybe we can take a look at that together. And I'm receiving information about Paramahansa Yogananda being a Kuthumi incarnation, and I'm not sure what the existing material from Mother has to say about that. But I'm getting that impression, and I'm not. And that might be that they want to update. And again, talking about Guru Yoga, I don't want the teachings to be diffuse. It's not that other people aren't capable of relaying the truth. But I think that everybody, to the greatest extent possible, everybody in New Thought ought to be on the same page. And I having looked at what I've examined and seen how information has come through, I don't believe that we would be doing ourselves any favors at all if we didn't really stick with Mother as much as possible and consider everything subsequent to her to be valid. Yes, if it's understood, if it is the truth. And I think that people in the know, in the inner circles of the church, and that's okay. I mean, it's okay that certain people want to be closer to the core than others, or certain people end up being closer to the core than others. I think that's fine as long as there's not a huge, interpersonal power disparity, or a disparity in who has access to what. But I do believe in adhering to Mother's teachings, and I think that I think I have access to the true dispensation, and in listening to people like Lipo, who is also a Summit Lighthouse Chila, and you can see his work on YouTube. He was one of the first 500 people to be invited to the inner retreat when Mother bought Royal Teton Ranch. It's his knowledge base. It's and I said this in a previous recording. It was surprising to me that I could watch the information that he was relaying, and have read, not having talked to the man in the interim, but having read 3 days prior and having developed my own impression of what was going on with a specific master or in a specific teaching, and have him mention the same exact point 3 days later to this. He talked about Sananda, and I had read about this and was receiving information about it. Sananda, and I have revelations that it's not time for me to impart with respect to certain of the teachings. It's just not time. I'm not prepared as the conduit for some of the information, but I know that it's part of the true teaching. But he talked when some of his information with respect to Sanat Kumara, the amount that he knew, when he had learned it, was all on a parallel track with my information. And that's when I realized that there is a teaching and a dispensation, and he is teaching me an incredible amount of information. And I believe that a lot of that has to do with having studied Mother for so many years and working with, trying to have as pure of a channel to the actual teaching as possible. But I do believe that he has access to, a lot of it. Absolutely. The other thing that's interesting too is when you watch Lipo, as I said, there are two types of Lipo. There's Lipo Ascension School, where he's sitting there. There are sort of three kinds of videos on the internet. They're great, by the way. You should really watch them. Seriously, if you want to change a pace, I could watch Mother, all day long, and but to watch Lipo and listen to Mark and so forth. But to watch Lipo is just phenomenal. He does Ascension School teachings out of Sedona, and you'll see him sitting in, it looks like a living room. There'll be a little light above his head, and he'll show pictures of the Sephiroth, and his version, because he doesn't believe that, he doesn't feel that he has some sort of, I don't know, he is, to me, he is like quintessential Summit Lighthouse. He lived there, but now he kind of wants to, I think he maybe wants to do his own thing, or is representing that he's his own school, which is fine, because I really honestly, because Mother instructed him to do that, and I really do think that he to go out to go forth and teach, and I do think that he is part of the true dispensation. In any event, and I don't want to put in a lot of unnecessary weight on that, but to the extent that false teachings might try to insinuate themselves into what the sorts of information that we try to relay, it's important to remain somewhat vigilant, and also to keep out information that might representationally distract us. Not talking about veering from the truth or what's necessary, but certain images, if they're known to us, we should share and be on the same page with respect to our I suppose iconographic representations, and we can talk a little bit more about that, and that goes into the Hindu, and I will provide you with a terminology for that as well. Lipo, so through three types of video modes of relating. The first is the Ascension School, and it's when he's sitting and sort of talking about and fielding questions. People will say, well, who, they'll have a question about, they'll have heard from Master R, or they'll have heard from another one of the masters, and not really have a lot of background information. Lipo will provide as much information as he can, and in certain instances he'll just say, I don't know. That's another point at which I knew that we were on the same page, is when he didn't have access to certain forms of information. It was the same. It was the same set of information that was being revealed to me, and which brings me to my second description of the Lipo video presentations, and that is when he is sitting at the table in an interview with two other women, presumably TSL women or CUT women, because they had specific questions about Mother. And one of the women pointed out that she hadn't heard certain information either, or hadn't read, I think it was Alice Bailey in this instance, or hadn't read one of the Theosophists, and she said, quote unquote, maybe I wasn't supposed to. That's important to remember, because there's only so much, and this is sort of general information for all of you who are studying along with me, and who periodically might be frustrated that you don't know, I don't know, all of the Roerich teachings, or all the everything associated with Steiner. We're shown information by the masters when we need it. Nobody's a walking encyclopedia, although we can strive towards having access to a lot of information and be like a mother or like a Lipo as far as the amount of information we handle and the manner in which the facility with which we're able to utilize that information and impart it to others. That's part of, I think, Order of St. Joseph too, is trying to get back to trying to make sure that Germain's teachings are preserved. But periodically we'll draw a blank for a reason. It's that we're needed elsewhere. Our thoughts are needed elsewhere. So, and the third Lipo, kind of Lipo video, is with another gentleman. I think, oh boy, and his name escapes me now, but he's a teacher, a spiritual teacher, and they share information together. So it's the two of them, it's Lipo and his associate. Then it's the interview with the TSLCUT people, second set of videos, and then the final set of videos are the Ascension School of Sedona recordings. It's all Ascension School of Sedona, but you'll be able to see that, the sort of the different qualities that he has. But those were the three settings that I was able to locate, the three, videotaping sessions that occurred. Tons of information. Oh my God, and just so really excellent information on, things that we need to do with our schools. His opinions about Alice Bailey, some of the points at which he differs from some of Bailey's teachings. I think Lipo had an issue, I guess, with the fact that it wasn't a threefold flame on the heart, on the altar of the heart for Alice Bailey. I want to say Alice Bailey thought it was power and wisdom, or love and wisdom. I'm not sure, but she was missing one of the three, and he points that out. I don't know that disqualifies her as being in the direct path of in the lineage of the dispensation or not. I haven't really given it that much thought. I am reading Education in the New Age, and that's interesting, although there are warnings because of all the serious abuse issues that are going on with psychiatry in this country. At the very beginning of the introduction of that book, they mentioned something that I would never support relative to psychiatry, and that ties into some of my volunteer work with people connected to the United Nations and so forth. The UN is totally opposed to how the various governments of the world, the local governments in the respective countries, are handling psychiatry. I mean, the UN recognizes it as torture, and it said that there shouldn't be any capacity determinations. This is important because it's hugely important to the masters. It's a huge part of the teaching. We don't. This is what we're doing. This is the work of the fallen angels in our world today. Is we're trying to circumvent the courts to get targeted victims locked up with no court hearing, trying to discredit people, religious people, all kinds of people with variant beliefs and who are dissenters and that sort of thing. Trying to get them hauled out of their homes, hauled out of their lives and locked up in places. It has nothing to do with God. It has nothing to do with freedom. It's totally anti-American. The UN has said it's torture, and yet nobody in the United States cares. And as we move forward with all these lies about allopathic healthcare, by the way, we're perpetuating in one of the things when we talk about wanting to become more progressive. We have to be careful. I'll explain that to you in a minute. So we have to be careful because of the individual mandate. In other words, there are Nazi-derived, and I'm not feeding you a line, I mean, this is a fact, the CIA, Operation Paperclip, imported the fruits of Nazi experimentation on Jews and gypsies, homosexuals, all the medical experimentation that he did on the people that they had marginalized and submitted to concentration camp extermination, that sort of thing. The United States government imported that information, started developing it in a mind control program operated by the CIA. They've admitted to as much, and they put it in the mental hospitals. And now it's part of routine business in the mental hospitals. People are being forced to commit suicide in these facilities. Their families are led to believe that this is in their best interest. You know, it's murder. And our government is supporting it, and our president is saying that people need to carry insurance cards and participate in insurance systems perpetuating it. How is a survivor of that sort of torture ever going to be able to interact in a process such as that? He or she isn't. I mean, there's no way. And it's entirely unacceptable to expect that people are going to do that. People shouldn't be forced to do anything, you know. And yet, our government, which we're saying is progressive, and many people, who knows, including some of these church people who are saying that they don't want the fundamentalism anymore. And yet, because we're sort of drawing the schism, we're losing track of the fact that some of the stuff that's going on with Obama, you know, entirely unacceptable. I mean, the man should be tossed out for doing that and caving to pressure such as that. And our allopathic doctors have to be stopped. Obviously, if they're proposing that, you know, top scholars in schools, because they're coming up with a lot of really positive information that's perhaps revolutionary in some respects, or potentially dangerous to the oligarchy, that they need to be institutionalized until, you know, they're murdered or forced to commit suicide, or they're permanently disabled. If that's the response, you know, in a system designed to discredit the victim, by the way, and a person who's victimized in that fashion, when he goes forward to the police and says, I was victimized, I was kidnapped, I was subjected to torture, concealed as healthcare, concealed as psychiatry, concealed as psychiatric praxis, imported from Nazi Germany, you know, all this stuff, people who come forward and say that they've been the victims of that are going to be discredited. And that's part of the point. And that's why psychiatry is entirely unacceptable. You know, when Mother and Mark were leading the church, a lot of that information hadn't come out yet. And, you know, periodically you'd still hear mothers saying that people should go to therapy. Well, talk therapy under certain circumstances if it's God-directed, and I feel that it ought to have a spiritual component to it for it to be acceptable. You know, I think that people should be seeing shamans and not traditional therapists. Why? Because this therapy emerges from this cauldron of evildoing and mind control. It is not an appropriate model. It truly isn't. You know, seeing a shaman and attempting to navigate problems in the Kuthumi sense, you know, Kuthumi being the master psychologist, is possibly acceptable. I mean, psychology in the sense that it is in its purest sense, which is not available in through the state departments of the world, or the state agencies, by the way. We need to bear that in mind. It's not that kind of psychology. It's not a psychology emerging from Freud and so forth. It's a pure psychology. But I mean, that's one of the Kuthumi teachings, I believe, forthcoming, is that having to do with the huge danger of psychiatry, how it's being, you know, the torture is being concealed. We're saying that this is something that we're doing to people over, or the whole thing with Abu Ghraib prison. Abu Ghraib goes on in the United States, and I'm not being an activist. It's the reality of the situation. That's a domestic problem. Nobody in the country knows about it because most people aren't subjected to mental health treatment. You know, most people don't undergo that, but the people who do and who survive it, you know, are here to tell you that it's not the world that you think you live in. So it's an enormous problem, and there's a lot of obfuscation with NDAA. The president trying to say that he supports, they're trying to make it so that they can support indefinite detention if they believe that you're a risk to national security. Well, getting up in the morning is a risk to national security. It's an excuse to, as Lipo said, it's an excuse to legislate our way of freedoms. He didn't say that specifically about NDAA because I don't think he has access to that information, but he did say it about 9/11. So I'm not sure if I answered the question. I'm not sure. That is based upon, you're asking about Jesus's time spent in Asia. It's based upon the lost years. If you look in the Bible, I mean, there's teachings up until I think it's until 12. Sort of he's last seen at the temple, and then he doesn't reappear again until his early 30s, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure. Possibly I think there's maybe about 15 or 16 years that aren't accounted for in there. So, it's read Issa, ISSA. That's his name. That's his ascended master name. Well, that's his Himalayan master name. I'll look up Paramahansa Yogananda right now. People are saying things about Ashtar. Galactic Command Flying Saucer Fleet. Okay, so Self-Realization Fellowship. These are interesting representations. They look very contemporary. Photographs of Paramahansa Yogananda. Now, Paramahansa Yogananda, when he passed away, made his ascension, his physical body stayed preserved from any sort of deterioration for a very long time after his death, because he was in an elevated state of yogic consciousness when he passed. Let's see what I can find. It looks like I'm just looking at photographs at this juncture. I'm not really... Let's see if I can answer any of these. No, it's not that. Okay, like, I wouldn't go to a channeled message necessarily from a random person saying that they're channeling Germain. It's because, I mean, it's not that that information isn't valid. It's that it's drawing me out of where it is that I need to be energetically. It is taking me away from my practice. I mean, you really do have to carve. I don't want to use the scientific paradigm, but you have to carve neural pathways. You have to have the angelic influence, and you have to have the connections. You have to ask for them. You have to seek them out. You associate material X, Y, and Z with certain things that you see and do in the church, certain symbols, certain statuary, specific icons. And to go to drop everything from TSL and then to turn around and say, I'm going to go over to Temple of the Presence, or I'm going to go over to another place. I'm not saying it's not okay to study at Temple of the Presence as well if you have the focus for that, or if you have the space allotted for that. You know, it's that you have to try to see where they are, their true positioning vis-a-vis the Summit Lighthouse. You're going to have to ascertain that before doing that. But say, for instance, I wouldn't want to all of a sudden start going to Catholic Church unless I'm sort of prepared, you know. But if someone random gets on the internet and says I have information about Germain, I'm not necessarily going to click on it. And it's not that I don't believe it. It's that I don't have the spiritual focus for it, you know. And I will come up with some of those terms so that we can share them. Well, there's one term. Let me try to find it for you right now. I'm not sure if I can get to it here. It's got to be here somewhere, right? And this is the term in the Hindu religion for the kind of consciousness work one does when one focuses on an exalted image, an iconographic image. I'm just going to look it up on Wikipedia. I think it's Murti is one of the words. It's M-U-R-T-I. There's a phrase. It's excellent too because we all do it. You know, and again, it's part of that preservation of an image. You don't look at, even if you don't look at a representation of Germain and just dismiss it, because you want that image of Germain to help you, and you want the recognition. You know, you want to be able to form. You want a thought form. You know. They're not wanting me to. It's just not coming into the path right now. Let me see. Okay. Okay, so, well, this is not really right, but these are mandalas. Sri Yantra. And I'm veering off from continuously talking, and that's fine because we're working together. We're exchanging information right now, and among other things, you're assisting me in collecting, additional information that will be used. So I'm not sure what's going on, but Ashtar is, that's some pretty interesting material. I'll have to say that right now. And they're not saying that it's not connected to the masters. There's a Himalayan connection there. I think it's Ashlam, A-S-H-L-A-M, working with one is a space. They call him the space detective, but I mean these are people who sort of have kind of they're kind of part of the cosmic intelligence. I don't want to say honor guard, because I think that they have a practical their purpose is it's not an honor organization. They actually research and investigate according to Karita. And Ashlam is a Himalayan master who works with, I think his name is, I want to say it's not Cusco, but it sort of sounds like that. And I can find more information for that on that as well. And Lipo isn't sure about that. One of the other points where Lipo and I were sharing information at the same time. That what are the chances of that coming up in conversation in a church, in Mother's church? You know, I read about it, and when the masters are sending me information about it, and then 3 days later, Lipo says, and I'm not sure about Ashtar Galactic Command Flying Saucer Fleet. I don't really get much information about that. I don't get much information about Sananda, an esoteric name for Jesus, and I had just read that as well. So let's see. Yeah, I can't find it. There's information about Babaji. Matthew, that's going to be another one of the forthcoming teachings as well. Matthew 5. This is actually in support of, I believe that this is a reference to decreeing. If you folks haven't run into this yet, there's, of course, you shall decree a thing and it shall be so, from the Bible, from Scripture. Matthew 5, chapter 5, verse 37. Let your communication be yea, yea, and nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. Okay, Matthew 5:37. There's a quote about quote-unquote vain repetitions, which, but it doesn't say it here. I think that fundamentalist Christians have used that against us in the past, but decreeing, in my view, is not a vain repetition. But I think that they've tried to use that from Matthew as a way to discredit our form of dynamic prayer. Karma, Mother revealed this to me yesterday. Karma means, and this is a fact, but she distributed it, means act, action, or word, or deed. So karma is an act, action, word, or a deed, is the meaning of karma. Likely the literal meaning. I'm not done processing any of that sin and karma information yet. I'll tell you that right now. I know it's important. Yeah, there's some interesting, and that's coming up in the conversation about Christology. There were some interesting breakaway, separatist, sort of pioneering religious movements, various points in the last 200 years, 300 years in the United States. The Millerites, some others. Nitya karma will play into the discussion on sin and karma, as will prana, Raja Yoga, and sadhana. The various Reformed confessions are important. To study and understand. And the confessions are it's doctrine. Don't confuse it with the sacrament of confession. It's meant in the sense of the particular doctrine. The different Reformed churches, depending upon if your church is more puritanical, or if it's Baptist, Lutheran, will they emerge from various confessions, and then there were sort of derivations at different points in history. They're interesting. They obviously have an agenda. When we talk about remaining alert to abuses of religion, or we would want to make sure that we understood the context as we were looking at these different pieces of historical information. This particular confession, the Helvetic confession, states that, therefore, concluding their argument about how Jews construct their religion, and they're not simply condemning Jews because they're Jews, they're condemning the Jewish way and the Mohammedan way. All those who blaspheme that sacred and adorable Trinity. So what they're saying is that they're not Jewish or Islamic, essentially. It's a really harsh way of putting it. We also condemn, this is Helvetic, all heresies and heretics who teach that the Son and Holy Spirit are God in name only, and also that there is something created and subservient or subordinate to another in the Trinity, and that there is something unequal in it, a greater or a less, something corporeal or corporeally conceived, something different with respect to character or will, something mixed or solitary, as if the Son and Holy Spirit were the affections and properties of one God the Father, as the Monarchians, Novatians, Praxians, Patripassians, Sibelius, and I think it's Praxeas, possibly, Praxeas, instead of Praxians, Patripassians, Sibelius, Sibelius. The spelling here is Sabellius. Paul of Samosata, Aetius, Macedonius. I guess Aetius could possibly be Edius, so something for me to spend my time looking up, right? Anthropomorphites, Arius, and such like have thought. So all these people have views of the hypostatic union that are divergent from, according to the Helvetic confession, working in opposition to the true representation of the hypostatic union, the true nature of Christ. It's going to take a long time for a lot of us to catch on if we choose to pay a lot of attention to the Reformed doctrine. Okay. Okay, well, The four masters, if you go to tsl.org and you look at the altar, it looks sort of like the front of a Catholic church. With the ornate, it almost looks embroidered. There's a lot of scroll work, typically speaking. It's behind the altar in the older churches. That's what Summit Lighthouse produces, and it's called the Altar of the Children of Israel. We're the children of Israel. And the four masters are Jesus, Cthulhu, El Moria, and Germain. At the Ascension School in Sedona, it differs. It's Cthulhu, Serapis Bey, El Moria, and Germain. So Jesus is included on that particular altar. He's not one of the four masters on the altar that Lipo is using. So that's kind of an interesting departure from TSL, but also reference to TSL. I don't consider Lipo to be exterior to TSL. I consider Lipo to be a TSL Chila. Okay, so that's some more information for you folks. Monarchianism, this is coming up, and I mentioned this a while back, this is what it is. It's any of several Christian heresies of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, so Anno Domini, that attempted to maintain monotheism and the unity of the Godhead, but thereby denied the independent hypostasis of God the Son. The unity of the Godhead, but thereby denied the independent hypostasis of God the Son. I believe that what that means, monarchianism, I believe that this is the term for people who believe that Jesus was God the Father, and not a flesh and blood or human at all. Not a human being, God. That was it. Just God. That's monarchianism, which is a heresy to Catholics and to, I believe, just about everybody at this juncture. I don't think anybody, although presumably there are people on the planet, and probably a couple stray, possibly interesting, groups, organized religious groups that still believe that. That would be something for us to explore, certainly. It's not what we believe or teach, but it would be interesting to know and maybe have some conversations with some of those people. So, Artemis, Temple of Artemis, well, it's in ancient Greece, right? I just have to see how it's pronounced, because I don't want to steer you wrong. I find myself destroying my own image of myself when I make all of these errors in how I'm pronouncing words. It's either Ephesus or Ephesus. It wasn't on Patmos. Let's see. They just don't want to tell me how it's pronounced, and I probably ought to just look it up, right? Let's see if I can do that for you. Okay, so, I think it's Ephesus. No, they're saying Ephesus here, of Ephesus, and this is just one dictionary. It's in West Turkey, one of the 7 wonders of the world. So the Temple of Artemis, that's where it's located. So I'm going to take a break and be back in like 2 minutes.